Hey Sam, how's it going?
Great. How are you?
Yes, I'm very, very good. I'm excited about today's episode. We were talking about sleep
Yeah.
and insomnia and challenges around sleep. And where should we begin?
Well, I guess sleep is something that's critical for well-being, right?
Mm.
You can't really operate very well without it.
Mm.
And so it's fundamental for physical, mental, and spiritual health.
Mm.
And it serves as the body's primary cleaning system. And that cleans
Okay.
Yeah, so it cleans both the brain and the body, and we have different stages for sleep for that. So we have REM sleep and non-REM sleep. So in our non-REM sleep, there's like three stages of light, deep, very deep. And then in the REM sleep, that's when we're kind of compartmentalizing our thoughts. That's like rapid eye movement takes place. We've got intense brain activity, and we compartmentalize our thoughts, and we might dream then. So
Mm.
it's really interesting. And the brain is incredibly active during REM sleep. So we've got the glymphatic system, which is like the brain's immune system that starts to kick in, and its activity is 60% greater than when you're awake. And so what happens is
Yeah.
that brain cells begin to shrink to allow room for the glymphatic system to increase by up to 60%, so that cerebral spinal fluid, that's the fluid that goes down our spine and back up through our brain, so it starts to kind of filter and clean out through four pump systems essentially. So it's incredibly important for detoxifying. And
Yeah.
what we do know is that people who have insomnia um, really feel the impacts of this glymphatic system being compromised.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if they have less of this kind of, flushing out that happens and cleaning, what happens? What's the impact of that?
Well, people kind of refer to it as like a sleep hangover. So not
Mm.
feeling quite, like they're operating in all four cylinders is a wonderful metaphor that people use, which is quite interesting in itself, because even though you might not understand the architecture of the brain, by somebody saying I'm not operating on all four cylinders, you kind of know what they mean, right?
Mm.
So it's just like kind of that brain fog. You might have difficulty with memory. We know that it does increase your risk of conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease. Mental health can also be
Yeah, I
impacted.
think I read a study that like over 90% of people that have this REM sleep disorder actually develop Parkinson's. I
Yeah.
mean, that's pretty alarming.
Yeah, and so if you say, like, just as a sideline on that as well, so we know that glyphosates, which is an insecticide, also is part of the etiology of Parkinson's. So imagine being exposed to glyphosates and having chronic insomnia, which impacts on your REM sleep. Like, that is going to increase somebody's risk of Parkinson's, right?
Mm.
But what happens in this glymphatic system, which is the immune system of the brain, is that it actually clears out amyloid plaques, which have been seen in imagings of people with Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we do know that it has consequences. Yeah,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
pretty hectic.
yeah,
And I mean, I think the thing with there's so many things that impact sleep, right? I mean, and insomnia has been called a disorder within, medical circles, and it's been very, very medicalized. But and I think there's this temptation that okay, because this thing is medicalized, we can just fix it quickly with some pill or some tablet or something like that. But there are actually quite a few things that cause sleep.
yeah,
So a bit like if sleep is a river or is a lake, and there's lots of rivers flowing into this lake that is
yeah.
affecting how this lake looks and the quality of sleep. What are some of these things that actually impact? sleep?
Well, menopause can impact sleep. And so what we know in menopause, like during perimenopause, we have surges of luteinizing hormone, which is a hormone from the brain in the second part of your menstrual cycle. And we know that that has some impact on the thalamus and hypothalamus, which can impact like night sweats, body thermal regulation. Estrogen helps with our serotonin and our GABA pathways and our acetylcholine pathways, and interruptions in that, of course, can impact on our REM sleep. And one of the key things that menopausal women can notice is that memory consolidation is a problem. So brain fog is probably a number one symptom that most women will, be challenged by during menopause. So yeah, there's stress is another factor, and I know that you can talk a lot to that as well. Like when we have high cortisol and high adrenaline, which is a sympathetic dominant state, during periods of stress, because that's what happens with people in life, one of the first things that they'll notice is insomnia as a consequence or as a byproduct to their high stress levels. And this sympathetic dominant state does all the things that are opposite that you require to go to sleep. So it inhibits GABA production, which is the most abundant inhibitory neurotransmitter, which is required for sleep. Yeah. So yeah, I just like when because I know that you work a lot with trauma and stress, and so what do you notice?
Well, I think, we did a previous podcast episode on what happens with the autonomic nervous system, when we're experiencing stress. And when we're in that constant sympathetic dominance of fight or flight or, fix and constantly on the go, your parasympathetic nervous system really struggles to kind of get back to that ventral vagal, calm, relax, rest and digest space. Yep. It can only really collapse in the dorsal vagal type collapse, which in the polyvagal system that is consistent. So it's really it can get quite dangerous. And in fact, from a thing that can impact sleep the most, it's not a medicalized thing. And this is where I think the medical profession has really got it wrong. I mean, people are like, I've got a problem with my sleep. So what do? The first thing they do is they go to their doctor. But actually addressing sleep issues, you've got to look at all the rivers that are flowing into the lake. You've got to look at what is going on in my life right now. Are there psychological things that are bothering me?
Yeah.
Have I had a recent traumatic thing that has happened and it's activated the sympathetic dominance, so I can't rest. I'm collapsing, which collapsing, you might be able to get to sleep, but you might not stay asleep, right? And you might be restless and tossing and turning, and you might not have good restful REM-driven sleep. And that then promotes, the insomnia from kind of going and spiraling out of control. And we see that in the studies that the psychological sources of sleep are actually far outweigh medical and lifestyle sources of sleep. So if you've got stuff going on in your life, the first thing the way that we know that that's a problem is usually the sleep goes. And if you don't sleep well, it heightens the risk for depression, for OCD, for, kind of various challenges from a psychological perspective. And there's a sleep anxiety feedback loop that also happens. So people that have insomnia often have performance anxiety, like I haven't had my 8 hours, so I'm going to perform really badly tomorrow. And then that makes them more anxious. So they're now actually causing that HPA axis to get upregulated at night because they're all wound up and stressed about it. And now they're promoting this insomnia. And when that happens, you have effects on the prefrontal cortex in the brain. So less emotional regulation from that. You have the amygdala becomes now all heightened. So you're pumping out adrenaline at 2:00 in the morning. And your hippocampus, when you have too much adrenaline, your cortisol stress hormone increases. So then that affects the kind of receptors of the hippocampus. So then you have impaired memory consolidation. And this, if you're going through menopause, you're going through some psychological thing at the same time. This is now a soup that can spiral totally out of control.
Yeah, and it's addressing the particles in the soup each time rather than having this blanket approach. And For sure, people who are going through very tough times in life, medications may be the answer for them, but they're not the long-term solution. So, you do have medications like zopiclone, quetiapine, benzodiazepines in their various families, brothers and sisters, which are highly addictive. And so they can be useful if you've got like grief, for example, can cause chronic insomnia. And we know that zopiclone can help people get to sleep, and we know that quetiapine can help people stay asleep. But what happens to the architecture of the brain is that the brain is so clever, like it's got this innate intelligence, in that if the body doesn't have to make it itself because it's getting it from an external source, i.e. a medication, then it will just stop making it. And so then those receptors become
Lazy.
lazy, and like their kind of plasticity changes. We can see that, like GABA painting, for example, and what that does to your GABA receptors. And that's where I like, as a herbalist and naturopath, functional medicine practitioner, I would go, well, what herbs would we use to help the plasticity of those GABA receptors? Because we know that GABA is required to sleep. And then this I just want to backtrack a bit as well on high performing type A personalities. Put my hand up to that. Absolutely, that's me. But when I don't have enough sleep, that actually causes me quite a lot of stress. And so these sleep trackers now that people are using, they're handy, albeit they can, I'm not sure you're supposed to be sleeping with these in your body in terms of what it's doing to your meridians, if you look from a Chinese medicine perspective, but it causes a lot of stress for people when they're not getting the right ratio of REM and non-REM sleep, for example. That can be a stressor.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I think there's a rise of something called orthosomnia, which is actually a sleep anxiety caused by tracking applications. So, I mean, there's been some new studies that show that people actually sleep worse when they fixate on their scores and they're actually thinking about this stuff, and let alone you've got this electromagnetic thingy sitting on your arm or your finger or whatever, and you think you're doing a good thing by doing this tracking, but actually, studies show that all technology near you at night actually can worsen sleep. So having your phone on the other side of the room or even out the room, having your trackers out of the space, and actually just keeping things actually quite simple is more predictive of better sleep.
Back to basics, eh? And then I know that you were like we had briefly touched on blue light, and it's interesting. I was just doing a little bit of research on that last week, and I had some queries around, the blue light filters and this infrared that you can put on your face to stop aging, and another sideline here. But I was just like, if you're speeding up collagen cells, like surely that's got to have some kind of impact in terms of an anti-aging thing. But I don't know, like our ancestors didn't sit in front of red light to do things. And so,
I mean, it's funny when you watch all the sort of the trends on social media and everyone's like, oh, you must an hour before bed, like get rid of all the blue light. And it's massively overstated from a research perspective. I mean, the research actually shows that all this focus on blue light actually just distracts from the deeper psychological drivers of insomnia. The psychological drivers are actually the biggest drivers, and, a lot of the reason behind that is that, we have something called, there's actually some part of the brain that's called the default mode network, which is responsible for rumination and obsessions. So if you've got something that is eating away at you, it's gnawing away at you. And if you think from a psychological perspective, what are some of the things that gnaw away at us? It's stress. Can be we're worried about money, we're worried about our relationships, or we could be mulling on something that we've done, right? It's funny, a lot of people that I work with that have insomnia challenges are out of integrity with something. And I don't mean out of integrity from a moralistic perspective. It means their state of feeling whole and complete as a human and like living by their code is impaired in some way. Like they might be cheating on their spouse, or they've lied on their tax return, or something's happened where they're not quite like living by their own code and they feel a bit dodgy. That really impacts this default mode network. And when the DMN is active when the brain is at rest, this is responsible for a lot of the cause of insomnia. And we also have, from a PTSD perspective, this is, if you have unresolved trauma and you haven't actually processed trauma, this is when flashbacks and nightmares and things are at their worst, is at night. So this blue light stuff and sleep trackers, and let's go and focus on, the special neural thing we're going to wear on our head, these quick fixes, right? Oh, let's just take some melatonin, or let's just do all this other stuff. And it's nonsense. It's kind of a pseudoscience in a way, because it distracts from you really going into discovering these deeper sources, which are usually psychological.
And the other thing that our audience also needs to be mindful of is that when you get sucked into these social media items of red light, and it counters the blue light, and they go, scientific research, our science research shows that it does X, Y, and Z. And actually, when you dig a bit deeper, what they're referring to is the big commercial one, not the little tiny home-based one that they're talking about. And it's just a real use of a play of words as well. So you get it and you go, well, it's not done a thing. And you go, no, because the scientific research wasn't based on that machine. It was based on a big commercial industrial one.
Yeah.
And that's also quite interesting. But it's really interesting when you touch on that default mode network, because from my own experience, when I was selling a business back in November 2023, I felt like I was really out of integrity with my clients, because I was the one to deliver the redundancies and the shutting of the business to be relocated to another city, myself included, that lost my role. But in that process, that I was getting up at 2 a.m. and really ruminating about people's lives, how they were going to lose their jobs. And, that had a massive impact on me at the time. And because it was outside of integrity, because I love honesty, and I wasn't able to be honest because of business reasons and, confidential contracts, to disclose what had to happen during stages of redundancies. And, that's a really good example.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key really is that medical professionals have medicalized sleep, medicalized insomnia, and there isn't a quick fix. There are rivers that flow into this lake. Taking a pill to make your lake look better, it might work in the short term, but you're basically kicking this ball down the field. And at some stage, you need to go get the ball. And I mean, even melatonin, which is considered natural, it actually disrupts and desensitizes your melatonin receptors within your brain. So long-term use of this stuff, even that is damaging. So whether you're on quetiapine or zopiclone or any of these kind of meds, Xanax or whatever stuff that people give you, and you think, cool, in the short term, this is going to be great for me. And then 6-7 years later, you now find you have to go on really high doses, and then it's really dangerous. I mean, you've had clients that have had situations like this, right?
Absolutely, where where they're on all of those medications because they build up a tolerance to one, and then they put on another, and then they put on another, and then they come to you on polypharmacy going, I don't want to be on these anymore. But it's really quite difficult to come off these addictive medications, and
quite dangerous to do it too quickly. You have to kind of really come off quite slowly, right?
Yeah, and also needing to do it with the sign off and support of their medical practitioner, who was the person that prescribed those. So it does need to be done very carefully with a medical professional. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it helps in an acute stress response. But there's other ways that you can support, say, GABA levels. And I like the analogy of the streams, coming in and creating this river, if you like, and
the lake.
Yeah, the lake.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, sometimes upriver you've got a bit of a dam issue, and so you need to bring in the beavers, for example, how important they are to the ecosystem. And I do like to use these kind of examples to clients and go, yeah, well, that one's really quite blocked. So let's get the beavers in here. And that beaver might be that you cut out alcohol. So there's different beavers for different parts of upstream, for example. So you might decide that you cut out sugar 4 or 5 hours before you go to bed. You might not have alcohol 3 or 4 hours before you go to bed. Alcohol is a massive REM disruptor. So it's a sedative and it gets you to sleep. And so it can trick you thinking, oh yeah, but a whiskey or a few wines help me get to sleep each night. But actually what it does, it really suppresses REM sleep, and then it causes a REM rebound and causes frequent awakenings, which most people will, who drink alcohol will, resonate with. And then increasing your GABA levels, so like regular exercise, particularly good at walking. So that's that mind-body therapy, which we know that if you start to adopt that and weave that into a way of being in the world, so it's not a thing to do, it's a way of being in the world that you adjust to and begin to like. We know that increases GABA receptors. Meditation, deep breathing exercises, consuming GABA supporting foods, foods rich in magnesium, for example. So that might be things like pumpkin seeds, Brazil nuts, almonds, figs, bananas, dark chocolate. Dark chocolate doesn't have as much sugar in it as your standard milk chocolate. Lentils, chickpeas, brown rice. Just start looking at how can I have this multifaceted approach to bring in more magnesium that helps with the GABA plasticity and kind of movement. If you imagine like a GABA receptor, like a transformer, like it's moving, there's so many ways, and just having really consistent sleep hygiene practice, like training.
But kind of evidence-based, which is actually a lot simpler than all the sort of pseudoscience stuff that is out there. It's actually, keeping things simple in your life, leading a simpler life, whether that be from psychological complexity or your nutrition, making sure you get good nutrition and looking after yourself, like, getting back to basics. And I think it's interesting because the medicalization of insomnia and this idea that we should just be able to do something quite quickly and just sort it out really, really fast, it makes you think that somehow you not sleeping it's a medical thing and the doctors need to fix it. So you want the change, but you don't want to change all the factors in the rivers that actually contribute towards the quality of the lake, period. And this is what is the most frustrating for people is, they come to me, they come to you, and they're, I can't sleep. And, and they kind of just, well, what tech can you recommend? What app do I need? And it's all just, no, it's like we have to go and look at every single river here because it's a system. It's not one thing.
There's also, I believe, a discipline. And so when you talk about change, in my studies of motivational interviewing for behavioral change, like only 30% of people will make change, and they make it usually during some kind of crisis. And that crisis usually is something to do with a type of relationship. Okay, usually, because we're wired to be relational at a DNA level. Yeah, and so change requires discipline. And I was just talking to my son this morning about he's kind of got in a way that he goes to his piano lessons on a Tuesday, and that's it. That's all he does with his piano, right? And so I was saying to him this morning that to be able to move forward, it requires some form of discipline. Yeah. And it's across all aspects of life. And so the discipline of, it's 9 o'clock. Okay, I'll start my ritual of going to bed. Like, do I have my chamomile tea now? Do I get my pajamas on? Do I start to dim my lights so that my brain starts to work out that actually things are just starting to slow down a bit now? Like we're not playing video games before we turn the light off at night, or we're not watching our horror movie, or there's an element of discipline. There's an element of discipline to get out and exercise. Some people love exercise, some people don't like it, but they know it's good for them. And so, that's key to
But in
this.
the same way that you can't out train a bad diet, you can also not have this amazing routine if you have underlying psychological things that you're not facing.
Right. Yeah.
It is still, the studies all show that the psychological components are really massive. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the treatments from a psychological perspective, because there's sort of, there's CBT for insomnia.
Yeah.
And this is kind of named the gold standard, and it's, some of it can be, useful. Some people, appreciate the idea that, you, instead of saying, I need to have 8 hours of sleep. And in fact, studies show that not everybody needs 8 hours of sleep. Like, people are also different. So it's sort of working out what works for you. You might have 6 hours and you'll be fine with that. But so CBT for insomnia is kind of, instead of saying I have to get the 8 hours, you just saying, my body will take the rest that it needs. Sort of, there's a little bit more of a supportive kind of idea behind that. There's also sleep restriction therapy, which can be, it's counterintuitive. You actually like get less and less sleep, and it actually forces your body clock to kind of reset itself. It's paradoxical and kind of counterintuitive. It does work for some people, but again, this is not a one size fits all type thing. The challenge with kind of CBT for insomnia is it's very much based on whether like your rhythm as well, your chronotype, like whether you are a night owl or a morning person. If you have psychological things that you're not dealing with, it doesn't matter what CBTI you're doing. And even your circadian rhythm genetics can kind of mess with that. I mean, I've got a client, he's hilarious. Like, he works on this sort of 27-hour cycle, where when I talk to him once a week, I'm sort of like, well, what time zone are we on? Because today it's 2:00 in the morning for him. But the next week it's like, it's 11 a.m. and he's, because he keeps moving his cycle. He moves it forward. So he doesn't have a regular sort of cycle, which is really, okay, works for him, and I think, the challenge with CBTI is it doesn't work for everybody, even though it is the gold standard. So if you are, again, it's medicalized, here's your solution, go get this therapy. It can sometimes be, it can cause sleep deprivation in vulnerable people. So if you're telling yourself, I'm saying this stuff, these positive affirmations to myself, they're not working. It might be that there's some other cause that you haven't looked at. So the only treatments that really work are treatments that are these ones that we're talking about here. So from a studies perspective, it is getting back to basics, having good sleep hygiene, looking at all the factors that could be influencing sleep, like looking at every single river. The mind-body kind of somatic mindfulness therapy and somatic-based therapies are very, very effective, because it's about the body and getting the body to a place of rest, finding the source of psychological challenges that you're dealing with so you can actually get yourself in a better place, and addressing it like, I'm going to change. I don't just want this change. I'm going to change. I'm going to make changes to address this across the board, and I'm willing to do what needs to be done, rather than just give me this thing quickly and let's just get this over with.
Yeah, and just to backtrack to CBT as a gold standard, I can hear what you're saying there, but I'm not sure I agree, because I think, because there's so many rivers involved in the etiology of insomnia, I don't think one size fits all of
Definitely.
one modality treating insomnia, when you could use CBT till the cows come home, for example. But if there's something wrong with, I don't know, they've got some genetic SNPs, for example, that they have issues with, GABA receptors or comp pathways or SAM-SA pathways, a bit technical there, but I guess what I'm trying to express there is that if there's issues with nutrients, then that can't be a gold standard. So I really like your metaphor of the rivers, and by focusing on many of the rivers, then that is the answer. And this is where we need like these longitudinal studies of clinical outcomes, for example, rather than like these standardized 8 weeks, or we did this for 8 weeks and this was the outcome. And so that's just looking at it through quite a kind of narrow lens in a way, isn't it? So I think by focusing on all of those things that you beautifully summarized there, I think that is the way forward.
And it's supported by science. I mean, a 2023 meta-analysis actually said that this trans-diagnostic process is the most effective kind of approach to sorting out the causal methods of insomnia. And the big thing is to try to seek early treatment. Don't kick this ball down the fence, because sleep, as we said, it can prevent mental illness onset. It can cause diseases later in life. And if you just kind of taking some tablets to get yourself to sleep every night, you kind of not necessarily, the doctors don't always tell you all the side effects of everything that you're on. And if you're a menopausal woman who is on hormone replacement therapy, but you're also taking quetiapine and a whole bunch of other stuff, you don't actually know what your genetics are underneath everything. This could be causing quite a lot of long-term challenges for yourself. So looking at the system.
Looking at the system, that's right. And how beautiful the system is orchestrated by the many systems, like the 12 systems in the body. They don't work in isolation. You can't truncate one system without looking at another, It's just beautifully orchestrated.
Yeah.
So next week, I think we're going to maybe follow on from sleep and maybe look at the microbiota and the impacts of that on the system.
Well, and it's interesting because there was a study that I read recently about the effects of dysregulation of the microbiota with sleep. So it's really perfect that we're actually covering that next time.
Nice. There's so much on it. There's an amazing book which I'll bring along next week called The Third Brain, and it talks very much about the microbiota and the impacts on the brain. It's a fabulous read. But I've also got another book here that's I've used for the last 15 years by the late Henry Osiki, and it's Sleep, Health and Consciousness. And it is a physician's guide, but it's just full of science. It's a beautiful read, but yeah, highly recommend this book as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome.
All right,
guys. We'll see you next time. Musing all things health, relationships, and trauma. Till next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
The information shared on the Naked Insights podcast is for educational and information purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. While we aim to provide helpful and accurate insights, individual experiences may vary. If you're experiencing trauma, mental health issues, or distress, please seek guidance from a qualified professional. The views expressed by us as the hosts are our own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any affiliated organizations.